So today we're going to talk about a relatively rare type of condition or conditions, muscle inflammatory conditions. I won't go into too much detail of all the subtypes, but essentially you can have muscle inflammation on its own, which we tend to call polymyositis, muscle inflammation that can occur with skin inflammation that we call dermatomyositis, and in children, we tend to differentiate it and call it juvenile dermatomyositis because it usually has a more favorable outlook. These are relatively rare conditions, and they fall into the group of conditions known as connective tissue diseases. So let's get started with the muscle aches and pains and how this might differentiate from other usual typical muscle aches and pains. The first thing is that there's not usually a clear onset for inflammatory muscle pains. Sometimes it's been triggered. The trigger will be something that has activated this immune attack because, like with most of the rheumatological conditions, myositis, muscle inflammation, is an immune attack on the muscles that has come because an activation of the immune system has occurred in someone who had a pre-existing genetic vulnerability to attack their own tissue. So typical viral onset might be quite common. You might have had a flu 6 months ago, but some people can't pinpoint an event that started this. What has happened since then is muscle aches and pains that don't seem to be particularly related to how much they exercise. They don't seem to be improving even when they're trying to do stretches or other typical interventions you would do for typical muscle aches and pains. They're usually worse first thing in the morning, and it can take quite a while to get going, typically half an hour or more. It also affects parts of the muscles which we call the proximal muscles. The proximal muscles are the muscles closest to the trunk, so it's the upper arms and the thighs. So these areas are often the first or the most affected. So it might mean that you're having difficulty reaching up to a high shelf. You might be having difficulty going up and down stairs. And it's particularly troublesome when you wake up. Usually it gets better in the early afternoon and it might get worse again overnight. Okay, so that's the muscle side, but we were talking about skin rashes and how they can relate to that. In dermatomyositis, you may see changes in the skin. These could be evident in your face. For example, you may have changes around the eye called a heliotrope rash, which is often described as a sort of violety rash that encircles the eye. You may have changes in the hands, little bumpy areas called Gottron's papules. You may be experiencing Raynaud's, where the fingers become a pale colour, particularly present in cold weather. Or there may be quite significant impact in the hands where you're getting quite a lot of inflammatory change, maybe fissuring. It almost looks like you put some corrosive chemicals on the hands because they've become cracked. In severe instances, we call them mechanics hands because it's almost as if you've been working on an engine bay all day. You've got little cuts and marks on the hands. You can also get a photosensitive rash. That's a rash that's made worse in the sun-exposed parts of the body. And it often affects an area across the top of the shoulders. We call that shawl sign, or in the V-neck area around the chest. The rash can sometimes look like someone has plucked the skin, like a plucked chicken appearance is what they give it, which is given a particular name called poikiloderma. So if you're having characteristic rashes like a heliotrope rash, Raynaud's, Gottron's papules, these might be suggestive that you have dermatomyositis. It's quite important to get these conditions looked into. Alongside the factors causing you a lot of aches and pains, and obviously the skin rashes can be a problem, this can also cause an immune attack on some of the organs in the body. For example, an attack on the lung tissue, and this needs more urgent intervention. The other reason to want to get this looked into is that dermatomyositis and polymyositis can sometimes be heralds of an underlying malignancy. In some patients, we find that malignancy is the cause, or sometimes they have dermatomyositis, and then shortly later on, we find that that was caused by a very early cancer malignancy. Now, without alarming everyone with this condition, it is only a small proportion, but it's a significant enough association that if you're diagnosed with these conditions in adulthood, your doctor's likely going to perform a screen for malignancy. So yes, your skin changes can be associated with your muscle aches and pains. And certainly if you're experiencing morning stiffness and morning pain in the muscles that's gone on for more than 2 or 3 months, especially if you've got any skin changes, it's time to get seen by a rheumatologist. If you found this video helpful, do give it a like or a share, and feel free to drop me something in the comments.